When we were 13 years old, my best friend and I co-founded a nonprofit halfway across the world in Haiti that educates hundreds of children every year. The most common response I get to this is, "That's impressive." But I resent the idea that this can't be the norm. I'm not somehow intrinsically different. I just failed a few times until I learned to understand social impact in a way that allowed me to act big. I think we've all felt it before, that desire, in the face of injustice, that urge to do something, to create change. And sometimes that feeling does translate to action, but more often, for many reasons, it fades. Oftentimes, we find it so daunting or inaccessible to act on that feeling that we scare ourselves out of any action at all. Think about it. We consume this image of change makers and grand problem solvers, an individual, some great hero that ventured out and started something new. But this narrative actually hinders us from becoming change makers ourselves. What if every time you had that feeling to create a change, you did? What would our world look like if social impact was accessible to everyone? And what if that attempt at change always worked? Take Haiti as an example. Before the 2010 earthquake, the UN conservatively estimated that there were already 10,000 NGOs and multiple other government initiatives and community development groups working in the country, and this number has only increased since then. All of that for a population of under 11 million. Proportionally, that means that there is at least one development initiative for every 1,000 people, and this has been the case for over 10 years. No country in the world has more NGOs per capita. And yet, Haiti is consistently ranked as one of the poorest and most deprived countries in the world. Something clearly isn't working. The way that we think about social impact has to change if we want real change to happen. If we can understand that anybody can be a facilitator for effective impact, rather than an individual actor for glorified change, we can achieve a reality where anybody can become a change maker. So in the face of an injustice, how do we actually act on our desire for change? I first traveled to Terre in rural Haiti when I was in grade 9. When living there, everyone I was meeting was only in grade 2 because there were no schools in this community. They were the ones telling us that education is the key to development and detailing their vision for how education could change the future of their village. And yet, at first, we couldn't hear. My initial urge when living in this community came from the lack of a way system. Being astounded by the thought of just chucking a wrapper to the side of the road when you're done with it, of just collecting household trash and burning it in close proximity to kids and other community members, the feeling I had told me that was a problem I should try to solve. So I attempted to act on that urge. We decided that we would implement a trash and recycling system in Terre because my co-founder and I, as outsiders, considered the burning and littering of trash as a huge problem. We were seeing a problem, but not hearing the people. In trying to move forward with this solution, we turned to community members to learn more. And it was only then that we started to hear. Trash? We don't have a trash problem. It wasn't until we truly listened to the people that we realized that this was far from their priority of issues needing to be tackled. The lack of education needed to be addressed first. On one of my last days in Terre that summer, I sat down with a good friend of mine from the community with a passion for education, and he spoke to me for hours about what it's like to not have access to schools, why education matters so much to his community, what the implications are for young people to not be in school, why he wishes he was just born anywhere else just so he could go to school. And there it was, the spark that made me certain that I would do something. People should not be limited by their origins. We are fundamentally all the same and should have access to the same opportunities. In some senses, I got lucky. I guess I'm from some of the right places. But in that moment, I recognized that it was my obligation to continue to use that access to help those who seemingly aren't. Given a different set of circumstances, I could be in their situation. This was the beginning of a shift from understanding my role in making impact, from being an actor to being a facilitator. From feeling like I had to come up with a real way system, like I had to come up with a new solution to create impact, to truly recognizing the wealth of knowledge and resources that already existed in the minds of community members. What we see as a hiatus, or what we consider as a problem worth solving, is based on our own background, context, and privilege. I deemed solving the trash issue worthy because it's something I experienced personally while living there that summer. But I wasn't dealing with implications of not being able to go to school in my own community. It's okay. It's normal that our frame of reference is shaped by our past experiences. This isn't even something that happens consciously, but we do have a responsibility to consider it. We must recognize what influences the conclusions we make so that we don't act ineffectively. So we scratched the trash idea, or at least put it on the back burner, and decided that we would try to help the community implement their solution for a school. But what did that look like? At this point, I was a 15-year-old foreigner with no social enterprise background. Just a girl trying to make a change in a very male-dominated society with an immense national pride and a coupled reluctance to work with outsiders, since they have so often been the source of exploitation in the country. To be honest, I was almost daunted into inaction by the complexity of starting a new school in a new country when I wasn't fluent in the language and I didn't totally understand the culture yet, and the fact that I've never opened a school before. But I'm grateful for this. I'm grateful because it pushed me to admit something I may not have otherwise. I don't know how to do this, and I can't pretend that I do. And unfortunately, that is something that so few people working in social development are willing to admit. This admission transformed our strategy to spending more time listening, less time talking, to taking the time to recognize the wealth of knowledge and resources that already existed locally. So how can we, collectively, change the way that we think about social impact? We can resist the urge to project or prioritize someone else's needs based on our own past experiences. We can understand that no matter how daunting or inaccessible might seem to create a change, we can take a step back. We can recognize that inventing a new innovative solution is not the only way to be a change maker. The solution can be in the strategy, in the connection of resources. We can thus transition from this actor mindset to adopting the role of a facilitator, where a new actor is that glorified individual who ventured off and started something new, something that's never been seen before. But the fact of the matter is, it isn't about that individual. It shouldn't be. It can't be, otherwise the model will never sustain beyond that person. Idolizing a hero diminishes the dignity and agency of those who are also working to make a solution happen. And it's not only inventing a new technology that you can have viable impact. Solutions already exist in this world, but just need to be more widely accessible. A facilitator, on the other hand, is somebody who reflects on their intentions, recognizes what exists locally, identifies what they have access to that can fill existing gaps, and facilitates the connection of these to have significant, effective impact. They are a bridge, a connector. In our case, we overcame almost being daunted into inaction by being honest with ourselves. We recognized the need to learn and discuss with other people before starting anything. Before starting, we spent 8 months connecting and discussing with NGOs working in Haiti, groups working on tackling education innovation worldwide, locals in the targeted communities, just to learn what they do and how they do it. Frankly, my best friend and I never had the intention of starting an NGO. But we did experience this feeling and followed up on that feeling by trying to thoroughly understand the problem. Understand it so personally that that desire to make a change couldn't fade. Understand the very basic injustice of access until that feeling turned into a responsibility. We don't choose where we're from, what situation we were born into, and what we do and don't have access to as a result. But what we do have access to, somebody else doesn't. And that's what we were thinking in Tafwad. We had taken the time to understand the problem and what did and didn't exist locally to address that problem. So we thought we would try facilitating the community's implementation of their own solution by leveraging our own access to help fill the gaps they wanted to fill. It was an easy enough calculation in the minds of 2 teenagers. They had the vision, the capacity, the ideas, the human labor, a vision for a solution. We, given where we were living, had access to potential donors and other funds, and given our access to the internet, could also reach out to potential partners. So we thought we'd just give it a try, to just connect those assets. Next thing you know, we were registering as an NGO just to facilitate the logistics. So what did that look like? By implementing the facilitator approach, we understood, okay, funds and partners. We were able to raise over $200,000 before we turned 18, but it was through babysitting, tutoring, planning birthday parties, running events, asking for donations. And by Googling and cold emailing companies, we were able to find partners to help with construction needs, teacher trainings, and item donations. And as a result, we have co-created the first school in Tafwad and the first community-owned school in the region, and are educating over 175 students every year in everything from arts, technology, leadership, and more. co-created. My best friend and I didn't build the first school in South Wad. We facilitated their creation and implementation of the first school in South Wad. The ideas and the capacity for change are the most important resource for social impact, and often the most effective ideas come from those who are living the reality of the problem every day. We are the only NGO project I know of where the land the structure is on is in the name of the community members rather than the NGO. The school is community-owned, community-operated, and on its way to being fully independent. But our objective? It's to go out of business, to render ourselves irrelevant. We have truly created a change when our presence as a facilitator isn't needed anymore. Solutions should not be measured by how much is fundraised or how long an organization has been working on a project. It should instead be measured by how many projects they were once working on that still exist but no longer need them, by how many communities once had a problem that they are continuing to address themselves. Our success is evidence that the strategy of creating change with a new mindset can work. Now, it doesn't mean that the rest is going to be easy. Believe me, we had our fair share of problems. But if you're able to channel that deep-rooted urge, that feeling of responsibility, you find a way to make it work. Whether with the NGO or with my newer venture, I have come to understand my role as simply a bridge between locally identified gaps and the resources that will allow those gaps to be filled. So what if we were all able to apply the facilitator approach to social change? The facilitator approach makes being a change maker less daunting and more accessible, and makes creating change more sustainable and effective. What if all development was community-led and locally based? What if all social impact projects were framed as giving people an outlet to solve their own issues? This teaches people that they too have what it takes to be facilitators, and thus that they can partner with other facilitators to create impact, rather than indirectly training them to wait for an outsider to solve their problems for them. Building projects with people and not for people, with this idea of working towards irrelevancy, means solutions can sustain. They can sustain beyond an individual who started it. They can sustain beyond an NGO stopping its work for whatever reason. They can be ingrained in the fabric of a society. And for all of us wanting to make a change in the world, if we can understand our role as being a facilitator, then we can understand that anybody has the potential to create impact. It's just a matter of learning how to understand people and how they desire to have their needs expressed. Simply recognizing what exists locally, identifying what you have access to that could fill existing gaps, and facilitating the connection of these to have significant, effective impact. Everyone in this room and in this world has more access to a certain resource than somebody else. Anything can serve as a means to attaining resources or as a valuable resource in itself. For us, it was the country we're living in and our access to the internet that allowed us to get funds and partners. For you, it could be your personal network, the language you speak, your access to social media, your access to higher education. Everybody has something. And thus, anybody can address a hiatus and create a much-needed change. Our story shouldn't somehow be an anomaly. So I'm asking you, what do you have access to? How can you better listen to those who express a need? How can you facilitate the connection between that resource and that need? And thus, how can you create impact?